the house was so quiet that night, I could hear the refrigerator hum and the old clock tapping against the wall, each second stretching longer than the last. My phone screen glowed in the dark, Daniel's name still unanswered. That kind of silence doesn't happen by accident. It presses on your chest, whispering that something's wrong long before you have proof. If you've ever felt that kind of dread, the kind that keeps you awake even when the world is asleep, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Maybe you'll understand what it's like to feel your heart break before you even know why. That was the night everything began to unravel. When my son stopped answering my calls, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't like Daniel to go quiet. Even on his busiest days, he'd send a short message, a quick love you, mom, or a photo of the sunset on his way home from work. But that week, there was nothing. No calls, no messages, just silence. I remember sitting in my kitchen that evening, the clock ticking louder than usual, the sound filling the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's waiting to tell you something you don't want to hear. Outside, the light was fading, turning the walls of my small North Carolina home a dull shade of gold. I tried to convince myself he was just busy, that maybe he'd misplaced his phone, but deep down, a mother always knows when something isn't right. I dialed his number again, my hand trembling, straight to voicemail. His voice sounded cheerful, like always, but hearing it made my stomach twist. I left another message, softer this time, almost whispering, as if he might still somehow hear me. Hours passed. I made tea, turned off the TV, and sat by the window, staring into the dark. The air felt thick, unmoving. I couldn't explain it, but my heart was restless, beating fast for no reason I could name. That night, I didn't sleep. I just kept thinking, what if this silence wasn't an accident? What if something had already happened to my son, and I was just too late to know it? There was a time when Daniel and I talked every evening. It didn't matter how long his day had been. He'd call just to tell me about a new project at work, or to ask if I'd made that lemon pie he loved. Those little moments, those ordinary conversations, were my comfort. They reminded me that even though he had his own life now, I was still part of it. But lately, something had started to change. It was subtle at first, a missed call here, a delayed text there. He'd laugh less when we spoke, his voice a little distant, like his mind was somewhere else. I tried to tell myself it was just the weight of adulthood, the rush of responsibility. But in my heart, I knew better. Mothers always know. We feel the tremors before the ground splits open. I remember setting the dinner table one Sunday, his favorite meal waiting, an empty chair across from me. The house felt too quiet, the air heavy with something I couldn't name. I told myself he'd call, that maybe traffic was bad, that maybe he just needed rest. But as the clock ticked past 8:30, that familiar ache began to spread across my chest, the one that told me something wasn't right. Sometimes I'd wake up at night, reaching for my phone, half expecting to see his name glowing on the screen. But it was always dark, just that quiet, unshakable feeling in the pit of my stomach, a whisper that something was slipping away. Back then, I couldn't explain it. I only knew that the boy who once filled every corner of my life with laughter was slowly fading into silence, and my heart was trying to warn me before everything changed forever. The first time I met Emily, I remember thinking my son had found the perfect woman. She was beautiful in a quiet, composed way, the kind of person who seemed to light up a room without trying. Her voice was soft, her manners impeccable, and she made everyone around her feel seen. I watched her that evening at dinner, how she laughed at Daniel's jokes, how she helped me clear the dishes even though I insisted she didn't have to. I told myself she was everything a mother could hope for her son to find. But as the months went by, something shifted. Small things at first. The kind you almost convince yourself you imagined. Emily had a way of taking charge of conversations, gently correcting details when Daniel spoke, or deciding where we'd meet before I even offered. She was never rude, never obvious, just firm in a way that felt rehearsed. I admired her organization, her grace, but I started to notice how Daniel's calls came less often, how our Sunday dinners turned into brief visits, then polite texts. One time, I called to ask if they wanted to stop by, and Emily answered. Her tone was sweet, but there was a distance behind it, something cold I couldn't name. She said they were busy, and before I could say much more, she was gone, like a door softly closing in my face. I tried not to read too much into it. Maybe she was just protective. Maybe Daniel was just settling into married life. But every time I saw them together, I felt like an outsider looking through glass, watching my son's world shift just out of my reach. And deep down, I knew it wasn't just life pulling us apart. It was her. And she was doing it slowly, beautifully, and without ever raising her voice. It was an ordinary morning, sunlight spilling through the blinds, the smell of coffee drifting through my kitchen. I remember humming softly, thinking I might finally call Daniel again, maybe convince him to come over that weekend. The phone rang, and for a brief second, I thought it was him, but it wasn't. It was Emily. Her voice was calm, too calm. I could tell something was wrong before she even said the words. My mind can't fully replay them now. It's as if my memory protects me from the sound, but I remember how my body reacted, the way the mug slipped from my hand, how the coffee splashed across the floor. I remember the silence that followed, the kind that feels endless, where even breathing feels impossible. Daniel was gone. They said it was an accident. Quick, sudden, no pain. I should have screamed, but I didn't. I just sat there, numb, staring at the wall as if it could somehow make sense of it all. Time stopped. The clock kept ticking, but I didn't hear it. My whole world had folded in on itself. When I asked about the funeral, Emily's tone didn't change. She said it had already happened, that everything had been taken care of. Just like that, as if saying it neatly would make it less cruel. I don't remember hanging up. I just remember sitting in that chair for hours, my hands trembling, trying to understand how a mother could lose her only child and not even be there to say goodbye. Grief turned quickly to confusion. The details didn't add up. No one had called me. No one had sent flowers or condolences. No obituary. No photos. Just Emily's voice. Calm, controlled, final. And for the first time since losing him, I felt something other than sorrow. I felt doubt. Because deep down, something told me my son's story wasn't over. Something wasn't right. For days after that call, I moved through the house like a ghost, eating without tasting, sleeping without dreaming. My son was gone, and yet nothing about his death felt real. There were no flowers, no cards, no friends reaching out to say they were sorry. Just silence. And that silence began to gnaw at me, louder than grief itself. I kept replaying Emily's words in my mind. How calm she had sounded. How final. The funeral already happened. Everything's been taken care of. I tried to believe her. I tried to be the kind of mother who trusts. But the more I sat with it, the more something inside me began to stir. That quiet, stubborn part of a mother that refuses to let go without proof. One morning, I picked up the phone and started calling. First, his workplace. They told me Daniel hadn't been in for over a week, but no one there had heard about an accident. Then I called the hospitals, every single one within 2 hours of where he lived. Each time, the same answer: no record, no patient, no report. By the third call, my hands were shaking. Not from grief this time, but from something sharper. Fear. Real, living fear. I tried the police next, hoping for anything, but they couldn't find a file. Not even a traffic report matching his name. That's when I knew something was wrong. Horribly wrong. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same place I'd waited for his call weeks earlier, and I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer, that I would find him, whatever it took, however long it took, because a mother knows when her child is gone. And I could feel, deep in my bones, my son was still out there. The sky was the color of ash when I pulled up to the cemetery. The wind moved through the trees in slow, hollow sighs, bending the tall grass that framed each headstone. I remember gripping the small bouquet in my hand so tightly that the stems snapped. It had taken everything in me to come here, to stand before the ground where my son was supposed to rest. The caretaker had given me vague directions, as if the name itself didn't exist in his records. That should have been my first warning. I walked row by row, reading names I didn't know, until I found the one that matched the date Emily had given me. But there was no headstone, no nameplate, no flowers, just a mound of dirt, uneven, unsettled, as if someone had buried something in a hurry. I dropped to my knees, tracing the soil with my fingers. It was soft, too soft. My breath caught. I don't know what possessed me, but I started digging. Just a few handfuls at first, then more, faster, desperate. The earth crumbled beneath my hands like it was giving up a secret. And then I saw it, the hollow space beneath, cold and empty. No casket, no sign of him, nothing. The world tilted. My chest felt like it was caving in. The sound that came out of me didn't even feel human. It was grief and disbelief twisted together. I remember the smell of the dirt, the sting of it under my nails, the numbness spreading through my body. Someone had lied to me, deliberately. They hadn't buried my son. They'd buried the truth. I stood there, shaking, staring at the hole that shouldn't exist. The bouquet still crushed in my fist. The silence around me felt alive, watching, waiting. If Daniel wasn't here, then where was he? And who had made me mourn a ghost? The morning I decided to drive to Daniel's house, the sky was gray and heavy, the kind of sky that feels like it's holding its breath. I packed a small bag, not because I planned to stay, but because I knew I wouldn't come back the same. Every mile I drove felt like crossing into a place between denial and truth. When I reached their street, the world looked too normal. The lawn was freshly trimmed, the porch light still on, and the house stood there, calm, silent, pretending nothing had happened. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the front door, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I wasn't sure what I expected. Tears, an explanation, maybe even proof that I'd been wrong all along. But when Emily opened the door, her expression was composed, almost rehearsed. She didn't look like a grieving widow. There were no flowers, no black clothes, no signs of a funeral at all. The house smelled like lemon cleaner, not loss. When I asked about Daniel's things, she said she had taken care of them. Her words slid over me like ice. I glanced around and saw gaps on the shelves where his photos once were. Their wedding portrait missing, his college degree gone from the wall. The only trace left was a faint square of dust. I tried to hold myself together, to sound calm, but inside, every instinct screamed that something wasn't right. There was no warmth in her voice, no tremor of sadness, only control. Every word she said was too smooth, too careful. As I stood there in that spotless house, surrounded by the absence of my son, I felt a strange clarity settle over me, a mother's certainty that truth doesn't hide this cleanly. Whatever had happened to Daniel, this woman knew more than she was saying, and I wasn't leaving without answers. I still remember the drive to Emily's house that day, how the world outside the window blurred into gray streaks, like the sky itself was trying to warn me. My heart felt like a drum in my chest, each beat heavier than the last. I wasn't the same woman who had once knocked politely on that front door. This time, I was coming for the truth. When I stepped onto the porch, I could almost feel the walls holding their breath. The air was still, unnaturally still, the kind of silence that hums with tension. My hand trembled when I rang the bell, not from fear, but from the weight of everything I'd lost. She opened the door, and for a moment, we just stood there. Two women bound by one man, divided by a secret. Emily looked different, tired, almost hollow, but still trying to wear that same perfect smile. I could see the cracks now, faint but there, around her eyes, in the way she avoided meeting mine. Inside, everything was immaculate, as if she'd scrubbed away every trace of him. No photos, no clothes, no memories, just emptiness disguised as order. I could barely breathe. My voice shook when I started to speak, though I didn't even recognize my own tone. Low, trembling, full of years of pain that had finally found a voice. She denied everything at first. Calm, practiced, distant. But the more I spoke, the more I described the empty grave, the unanswered questions, the silence, the less control she had over her composure. Her breathing changed. Her hands clenched. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, as if the walls might expose her. And then she slipped. It was small, a single sentence that didn't fit, a hesitation that cut too deep to ignore. In that instant, I knew. She knew more than she'd ever admitted. My son's story wasn't over, and she was terrified I'd find the ending. The air between us thickened, almost suffocating. My grief burned into anger, but beneath it all was something colder: clarity. I left that house shaking, my heart still pounding, but this time not from fear. For the first time since Daniel disappeared, I wasn't lost anymore. I was close, so close to the truth that it scared me to breathe. It was nearly dusk when I found the clue. A single envelope tucked inside an old file from the county clerk's office. One I wasn't even supposed to see. The paper smelled faintly of dust and ink, and my hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a copy of a medical discharge form, signed by Daniel. The date was weeks after his supposed death. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Alive. My son was alive. But where and why? The air around me felt thinner, charged, as if the world had been holding its breath and just exhaled the truth I'd been chasing. I followed the trail, addresses, records, fragments that led me to a small rehabilitation facility outside Raleigh. My heart pounded so hard, I thought I'd collapse before I even reached the door. Every step felt heavier than the last. When they confirmed his name on the patient list, something inside me broke. Relief, anger, and grief colliding all at once. He hadn't died. He'd been hidden, protected, or imprisoned. I couldn't tell which. They said Emily had admitted him under false pretenses after an incident. She told him I wanted no contact, that it would be easier for everyone to move on. I remember gripping the edge of the counter, trying to make sense of the cruelty behind that kind of manipulation. My son had spent months recovering in silence, believing his mother had given up on him. I walked into that room, and when I saw him, thinner, older, haunted, the world went still. My knees almost gave out. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, but I froze, afraid that the truth might vanish if I moved too fast. He looked at me with disbelief, then recognition, and I knew we were both forever changed. The lies had built walls between us, but love cracked them wide open. I found my son, but the woman I used to be, the one who trusted without question, she was gone. What replaced her was something harder, sharper, and unbreakably alive. That's when I realized the truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it remakes you entirely. When I look back now, I hardly recognize the woman I was when this all began. I used to live in a world where love meant safety, where truth felt simple, and where my son's voice on the other end of the phone could fix any ache in my heart. That world shattered the day he went silent, and I thought I'd never feel whole again. I've walked through grief that felt endless. I've stared at lies so polished they almost looked like comfort, and I've learned that sometimes the hardest thing in life isn't losing someone. It's realizing how much of what you believed was never real to begin with. But even through the pain, I found something unexpected strength. The kind that doesn't come from fighting others, but from facing yourself. In the beginning, I was desperate, clinging to hope, fear, and denial like lifelines. Every unanswered call felt like punishment, every quiet night like a test. I thought that finding the truth would destroy me, but it didn't. It set me free. Because the truth, no matter how cruel, is the only thing that lets us start again. I've stopped asking why life took the turns it did. Some questions aren't meant to be answered, only lived through. What I hold on to now is the lesson my son's story taught me: love doesn't end when people change, or when they leave, or when we uncover things that break our hearts. Love endures because it transforms us. It teaches us who we really are when everything else falls away. If you've ever faced something that made you question everything you knew, a loss, a betrayal, a silence you couldn't explain, I hope you find the courage to look for your truth too. It might hurt, but I promise, the peace that follows is worth every tear. Thank you for listening to my story, for walking through this with me. Have you ever had to face a truth you weren't ready to hear? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and if this story touched you, share it. Maybe it will help someone else find their way back to the light.